Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan Lapierre, the Director of Public Relations at the Partnership for Public Service, and I am delighted to be with you all and to introduce today's speaker for this session. As communicators, effective storytelling is at the heart of what you do, and it's at the heart of what we do here at the Partnership as well. Whether we're helping spotlight agency-level successes through the best places to work, or lifting up the incredible work of individuals and teams in public service through the Service to America medals, the Partnership is dedicated to helping Americans see government in a new and different light. With that in mind, I'm so pleased to introduce today's speaker. Doug Hattaway is a veteran communicator with decades of experience working in and around government. He was a key communications advisor to Vice President Al Gore, Secretary Hillary Clinton, and the Obama White House. He's worked with governments, political parties, and NGOs around the world to hone their messages and connect with the public. And he has pioneered the approach known as aspirational communications, which seeks to connect causes to the personal aspirations of their audiences. Doug will be taking your questions toward the end of his presentation, so please be sure to drop those questions in the chat here in Zoom. And with that, Doug, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. I'm a big fan of the mission of Partnership for Public Service, and a big fan of your mission, those of you who are in public service and working in the federal government. Whether you work in communications or any job that you have, you're going to find some value from today's conversation. As Jordan mentioned, I started out working on Capitol Hill, worked on the House side, worked for the Senate Majority Leader, and have friends and families in federal service, including a brother who just retired after 30 years at the Smithsonian. So I value what you do, and I'm glad that you're here to learn some tools, techniques, insights, and ideas that you can use to communicate about your policies, your programs, your initiatives, whether you are working communications or not, and whether your audiences on your mind are internal within your department, within the executive and legislative branches writ large, or with constituencies you serve, or with the general public, taxpayers. Whoever you have in mind, the material we're going to talk about today is going to help you communicate with them. And we've talked about it as how to be an effective storyteller. That was the topic. There's a lot behind that, and we're going to look into strategy, science, and storytelling. And there's really 2 or 3 workshops worth of content we could do. So for those of you who have already sent in questions, thank you very much. I'm going to try to address as many of those as possible. Feel free to start putting questions in the chat now. If you have a burning question on your mind, go ahead and put it in there, because I'll be looking as we go and try to address questions along the way as well as at the end. Tell you a little bit more about my company. It's called Hattaway Communications. We're based in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to use the power of strategy, science, and storytelling to help visionary leaders and organizations achieve ambitious goals for people on the planet. That's why we're here. And we draw on the science part from cognitive science, understanding how the brain works, social motivational psychology, linguistics, and other fields. And what the science says is that the storytelling is the most powerful way to communicate. Somebody had sent in a question before about why is storytelling helpful in government? We have a whole workshop, actually, by the way, that we do for scientists, policy experts, and others who aren't communication specialists, where we share the brain science, the science of storytelling, and then the art of how to do it. So if you're confronted with folks in your organization who just they think storytelling is fluff or whatever, we get a lot of that. Even though there's a lot of understanding, there's a lot of interest now, looking at the number of people signed up for this, it's clear people's eyes are being opened to the power of story as a tool for communication because of the brain science. And we'll go through a little bit of that actually a lot of brain science along the way. You can see here we work with a number of federal agencies. We've also worked with government agencies at state and local level. And we help with communication strategies, with campaigns around specific programs, or with professional development workshops where we share the science and tools and techniques that you're going to get a taste of today. So we work with federal agencies of all kinds in a variety of ways. So let's dive into some of the insights and ideas right off the bat about how to be an effective storyteller. As you can see here, we're talking about strategy, science, and storytelling. It's how we talk about the work we do. Let's start with a strategy. Setting clear objectives. For every story you tell, every communication you have, no matter what it is, giving a presentation, sending an email, creating social content, whatever it is, we want to have a strategic focus, a very clear sense in your mind of who your audience is, and what we call the communications objectives, what you need them to know, feel, and do. There's a lot behind that little phrase there of cognitive and motivational science. But what I'd like to encourage you to think about, and as we go through today's workshop, I'm going to have you pick a topic or a program or a policy that you want to communicate about, and we're going to outline a narrative about that, and think about who your audience is as well. And a good way to prioritize audiences, because I know you have very complex sets of stakeholders when you're working in government. But so to cut through the complexity, there's a very simple question we always ask. Who must do what to achieve the goal that you are trying to achieve? So strategic communications to us is all about communicating in order to achieve outcomes, achieve goals. So you need to have outcomes and goals in mind. And who must do what? Who needs to take some kind of action is a really simple but powerful question to cut through all that complexity and sort of prioritize. And sometimes, of course, you have multiple audiences. That's understandable. But try to start there. Who needs to do what? What do I want them to do? When you have somebody's attention in a communication, no matter what it is, take advantage of that and give them an opportunity to learn more or whatever it is that you have that they can do. And what you want them to know and feel, we'll talk about a bit later, because we need to speak to the heart and the head for maximum motivation. We need to connect with people both at an intellectual level, make it easy for them to understand things, but they also have to care, of course. Emotion works with cognition. Our heart works with our head to help us with focus, with paying attention, with remembering things. So the techniques we're going to show you do that. Story, that's another reason story is powerful, because stories speak to the heart and the head. Science. It's natural to think in narratives. The brain science, as I've mentioned, tell us that people learn the most through stories, because since humans have developed the capacity for language, we've learned our language, we've learned our values, we've learned how the world works through stories. So the way our brains are thinking have developed across cultures is to picture, to understand things in the form of a story. And I'll say more about that in a minute, because we're going to focus a lot of our conversation today on that. And on this other idea here, the topic of framing, which is the word that's used a lot. Framing is what you say first and most frequently about a topic, and how you choose to introduce a topic, which is a critical question, a critical choice, because the first thing you say about a topic shapes every perception and judgment that follows. That's essentially what framing means. That's the importance of it. What we're going to do today is think through how to frame your topic, no matter what it is, in the form of a narrative. So storytelling, it starts with creating a narrative framework, and we call it strategic storytelling. One thing about storytelling, people have caught on to the power and importance of it, and we're also being bombarded by stories, right? Every day, all day long, from all the media we consume and so forth. So for you to achieve strategically important outcomes, you need to be strategic about the stories you tell. And that starts with having a clear framework of ideas in mind. Conceptual frameworks are visual representations of ideas that are used to help orient people to a topic and allow them to process more complex information that follows. So what we're going to do is create a narrative framework in the shape of a story, and determine the big ideas that you want your audience to take away from your communication. Because I'm sure there's 1,000 things you could say about your topic. Figuring out how to frame it with a story, a narrative, is the most important decision you can make. So that's why we're going to spend our time on that topic today. And then you're ready to tell strategic stories, examples of specific people and specific settings and situations that bring your big ideas to life. Today's workshop is going to focus on the narrative framework. And to get into how to craft stories, we got a number of great questions in advance. I'm looking at a list of them I have here. Lots of great detailed questions about how to craft stories, how to deliver in presentations, that sort of thing. I'll try to address what we can there, but a lot of that would actually be a separate workshop on creating compelling content. So with that sort of overview of strategy, science, and storytelling, let's dig into the narrative piece. Here's the narrative framework I mentioned. This has developed a simple representation of how our brain sees the world. We try to figure out situations by creating stories in our head of protagonist, some kind of actor trying to act with intention to achieve a goal and having to overcome challenges along the way. That's kind of every story ever told. What we do is take that way that our brain works with people trying to achieve things, and the most basic storytelling pattern across cultures, a relatable protagonist trying to achieve a meaningful goal and having to overcome a challenge. The science behind this is it creates a coherent sort of set of ideas that help me wrap my head around your topic. And if we start by putting people in the picture, the people you need to motivate and mobilize, right, that you need to inform and engage, they need to see themselves reflected in some way. And that's through seeing themselves in some way as people and as the goals and the aspirations they have in their life. We want to reflect their values and aspirations. What the science says is if you start there, people are motivated. They're going to want to lean in and hear about your solutions, your policy, your program, your idea, your initiative, whatever it is, you want to frame as a solution to a problem. That seems pretty basic, but this is, with the complexity of policies and programs, a lot of the stuff gets lost. So those ideas together create what's called narrative coherence in the mind and makes it much easier to bring people along into the weeds with you to explain lots of detailed things. And of course, when you have people's attention, you've touched their heart and their head and opened their mind, you want to have a call to action, as I said. You want them to do something. So here's an example we're going to walk through from government of how we use this framework to help think about messaging for government. This was an initiative from the Obama administration, the Ladders of Opportunity, it was called, and they were looking for a new way to communicate about anti-poverty programs around the 50th anniversary of the so-called war on poverty, and asked us to help craft a narrative that was used by dozens and dozens of agencies, all the major departments that have to do with anti-poverty programs. And here's how we put the narrative together, that these programs are tools for fighting poverty. They serve families who are working hard to get ahead, whose aspiration, what those families are looking to achieve, is financial security, defined as a job that pays enough to have a decent home, educate your kids, maybe save for retirement. So let's start right there. And the remit, by the way, was to have a way to explain this that American taxpayers would understand and support. So starting right there, these are factual statements about people who get served by anti-poverty programs. They also reflect the values and aspirations of the public at large. So what we've started with here is speaking about the people served by the programs in an authentic, meaningful way that's meaningful to them and also to our audience. And then we frame the problem. Now, intergenerational poverty is a very complex topic. There's lots of causes and challenges around people in poverty, which last for generations. And poverty experts and advocates have lots of very smart ideas about why that is and how to deal with it. But to frame a complex topic like that, you need to step back and think of a super simple way to introduce it to your audience so that they're like, okay, I can understand this. The way we did it here was say the problem of poverty is that many children don't get an equal start in life. I'm going to say more about that later. A very simple, non-controversial statement about the problem that these programs solve. And what these programs are: tools, proven tools, tools that work, that help people learn, earn, and save for the future. So what you have there is 4 simple ideas that work together to form a narrative in the minds of your audience. That's sort of what it looks like. Getting there can take some work. So what we're going to do is help you do that. Think through each element of that. This is an example of a simple message that comes from that framework. A lot of kids don't get an equal start in life because their families struggle just to make ends meet. Government should offer hardworking families proven tools, etc. We just took that narrative framework and made a soundbite out of it. Testing that and other messages, that framework can be used to talk about all kinds of themes depending on your audience. All of them tested over 70% support, as you can see in the data there. How convincing is this to you, taxpayer, that the government should provide these programs? 72% of American taxpayers said that that was a convincing reason to do it. So this is a powerful approach. Then we went from there and crafted what I mentioned are strategic stories. These are stories of specific people in specific settings and situations that bring the ideas in your narrative to life. This is a story of David, a person who gets help from government anti-poverty programs. And you can see underneath, we've just written a little 2-paragraph story that he has a family, feels responsible for. He's working to provide a home and education. See those ideas showing up? This is his real story. None of this is made up. He didn't earn enough money, obviously, is the problem. And he took advantage of this one particular program. So we used the frame to tell a real individual story and then tied it to one of dozens of programs that we could tell a story about. So that's sort of the technique of get those ideas you need to emphasize first, the ideas that will build support and understanding, and then tell your stories in ways that reflect those ideas. That's step number 1 to being an effective storyteller. That's why we're going to focus on that today. You can see here an article that came from coverage of the Ladders of Opportunity initiative, and you can see how the reporter quoted the word tools. This is an example of what we call winning words, which we'll get into a bit today. That's, again, another workshop. If you have colleagues who use a lot of government jargon or policy wonk speak or whatever, there's a science behind why you should not do that and how you translate unfamiliar words into familiar language for people. And we call those winning words. And there's a science about how to use words that have the effects that you need. This was an example of winning words that people will retain and repeat. That's what we're after when we craft a message. And tools was obviously working as a powerful word to talk about government programs. In fact, President Obama kind of used that word, moving forward, and you hardly ever heard the word program. Here he is speaking to that idea in our narrative. This is from the second inaugural address. We're true to our creed when a little girl born into the bleakest poverty knows she has the same chance to succeed as anyone else. That's an example of the idea of how we framed the problem. Not every child starts out in the same place in life. There's lots of research behind why framing a program to help children is very helpful. So here's an example. He's taking the idea, even though he's not using the same words, that counts. So that's the other thing about storytelling. Understand the ideas you want to communicate and understand there's lots of different words people can use. So you'll have a set of winning words for sure, but understand you can be flexible about it. Being an effective communicator isn't about just being a parrot and repeating the same messages all the time. This is an example of storytelling. He framed it the way that we recommended. These are just some other examples of how this approach inspired leaders in the federal government to start storytelling. That Sean Donovan there who did a TED Talk, he was inspired by this kind of, we did this workshop and this kind of work, and he did a TED Talk and started using storytelling. And this is an example from HHS of how they used the framework and the language and started just putting it into everything they communicated. So I wanted to show you these examples to show how you can go from a very simple framework I showed into a toolkit that people can use to communicate in all kinds of ways. We can also measure this. This is a dashboard we came up with to measure whether communications about anti-poverty programs from the federal government and in the news media were communicating these concepts. So we created a simple dashboard. That's our narrative. We wanted to see whether things were showing up. And we can do media analysis. There's 2 pieces of it. Content analysis, what is the agency putting out? Are we all on message? And the other is what's showing up, right? What's breaking through in the news media or social media. And then we can do content analysis called, where an analyst with linguistic training goes through and looks at the ideas and the language that are showing up. And what you can see here, the blue on the right, is showing the messages that we wanted to show up. Government programs keep people out of poverty versus government programs foster dependency, right? These are sort of contrasting ideas or opinions about anti-poverty programs. So we can map out our ideas showing up in the conversation, how often they're showing up related to other ideas. So you can come up with the real storytelling strategy based on the strategy and the science, and you can measure your effects. So I wanted to show those examples of practical tools that you can use in government to do that. So let's move over to crafting your aspirational narrative. We call it an aspirational narrative. You've heard me use the word, I believe, already. We talked about aspirational communication. I keep referring to this article behind my shoulder. This is from the cover of Stanford Social Innovation Review, which you might be interested in checking out. A cover story on this methodology called aspirational communication. Basically what it says is, as I mentioned with that narrative framework, if you can do this in a way that reflects the aspirations of your audience, what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to have? What kind of community and country do I want to live in? Those ideas are our aspirations. What the science says is that we are motivated by those aspirations. So when your communications reflect those ideas, your audience is going to be motivated. So let's dig into it. I'm going to move quickly through the content. There's a good bit of it, of course. I feel like a fast-talking consultant, but continue to put questions in the chat, and I'll make sure I touch on as many as I can as we go. So what we're going to do, you're going to want something to write or take notes with. We're going to go around the horn and talk about people, goals, problems, solutions, so that you can craft a narrative that puts people in the picture, reflects their aspirations, and so forth. Let's talk about people. Help people see themselves. I talked about that. What are their aspirations? How are they showing up in it? Here's some science that I think might be very helpful. It certainly was useful in the realm of anti-poverty work. The idea of deficit framing versus asset framing. How do we talk about people? And a problem that we often see in communications, sometimes in government, particularly around anti-poverty, but other issues, is using language that actually creates negative associations in people's minds, negative ideas about the people we're talking about, the people being served by the program. And that's when we're using words that are inherently negative, whether or not you think of them as a bad thing or not, is not what we're talking about. But ideas like poor, low income, or marginalized are sort of terms that are used as adjectives to describe people. And when you do that, you create association between those people, whatever the idea is. So in the US, for example, the World Values Survey found that 60% of people in this country associate the word poor with the word lazy. That was what that survey found. So when you say our programs help poor people, you've just kind of said something that is not going to resonate in the minds of many, many Americans. So that's kind of the reality that we have to deal with, that there are negative associations, even when we use words that are euphemisms. So the technique is to use what's called asset framing. Again, when we say framing, what's the first thing you say? We want to talk about people in terms of their assets, their strengths, their capabilities, their aspirations, because those create positive associations in people's minds, like people who are served by anti-poverty programs are hardworking. They are striving to stand on their own 2 feet. They're struggling to get ahead. Things like that, that show, that create a positive sort of idea. And these things are all true about people in people in these programs. Here's a really good example from a group called the Be Me Community. Their founder, Travian Shorters, is an expert on asset framing and has a great workshop on this topic if it's something of interest to you. Here's an example. Deficit framing about an education program. Our program helps at-risk youth in high-crime neighborhoods stay on track, graduate high school, and avoid becoming a negative statistic. Essentially just talking about young people in its negative ways. I know that kind of language is familiar, but look how you can translate it into ways that are, again, authentic, meaningful, true, and positive. They don't create the negative effects. Our mission is to equip young people hungry for an education to overcome obstacles and achieve their dreams. See that? Sort of simple but powerful when you see it in effect. So here's the takeaway: emphasize the positive. When you're talking about your policies and programs, use positive language to describe people. And these are the people who are going to show up in your story, your protagonist. So I'm going to keep rolling along, but take notes. Think about, stop for a second. Think about the folks, I'm using the word stakeholders, who is served by your program, who supports the program. Think big about it. What are they like as people? Just what are regular old human positive words you would say in terms of who are they, what do they care about? Why do they need the program, right? In that last example, they're hungry for an education, right? Think about words and phrases like that. Lots of interesting questions. One of those is, will you get slides? Yes. After the presentation, we'll send a selection of slides along with a couple articles and resources for further learning. I'm going to keep, that was a softball question, but I'm going to keep going. And into goals. How do we talk about goals? How do we talk about people's aspirations is really what this is about. We're going to go into a little deeper into some science, specifically motivational psychology. And what is here, some of you might be familiar with if you took psychology in college. This is an adaptation of a classic model called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist, middle of the last century, who thought of a very powerful sort of way to think about human motivation that has become a very powerful tool to use in education and all sorts of contexts. What his idea was is that people are motivated, meaning, and motivation means, what is the reason I'm doing something? What's driving my decisions, my actions, my behavior? We are motivated to do things roughly on a hierarchy, he said. First, to meet physical needs for survival, right? Food, water, shelter, of course. For security, which is sort of a freedom from worry, like you've got your food, water, and shelter, and you're not worried about them going away, right? You feel a sense of security. We go for those first. Those are the things, like think about it when you're looking to get a job, right? The bottom line is they're going to pay enough to do these things, right? Then we're looking for more psychological needs. And again, these categories, it looks super straightforward. These things sort of blend into each other, but roughly, I have what I need to survive. I feel a sense of security. I want to belong. I want to feel I belong to a family, a community, to something larger than myself, a workplace. I want a sense of esteem, both self-esteem. I want to feel good about myself, and I want the esteem of others. I want respect, self-respect, and the respect of others. Again, these are things that motivate us to do things, to take jobs, to go to college, to whatever you're doing. And then the highest level he called self-transcendence, also self-actualization. I want a sense of purpose. And Maslow talked about that in terms of, he called it self-actualization. I'm using my inherent sort of talents that, make me who I am. And I feel like I'm really using that, right? And I feel fulfilled because of it. But also, he said, we look for self-transcendent. How do we use our gifts for others, to serve others, to make the world a better place, to, that sort of thing. He called self-transcendent, serving others. So these are different ways to think about people's motivations. And when you have a complex set of audiences, you're going to have people with motivations sort of up and down this hierarchy. The reason I show it is to offer you food for thought, to think about even sort of these anti-poverty programs, for example. You think a lot of it might be around survival and security, absolutely. But I'll show you some examples where it goes beyond that. Here's one from the world of international development. We work with CARE, which is one of the largest humanitarian groups in the world, and they respond to crises like famine. This is a common example of raising money from people to help families impacted by a famine. And of course, that's about survival. But CARE's programs do much more than that. They also have education, health, and entrepreneurship programs. So this is a part of a campaign we created for them to share lessons from microfinance program in Africa where small loans are given to women to start small businesses. And check it out. This is a story of transformation in 2 sentences. They started with a handful of pennies, kind of literally. Now they're entrepreneurs. So this is a program that helps with survival and security, right? But it's also helping them with self-esteem and respect in their communities, which is absolutely one of the findings of the research about these programs. And they're taking care of their children and serving the community. It's hitting on many levels. So I give those as food for thought when you're thinking about how do I talk about my policy or program and what it helps people achieve in their lives. So take a minute, think about that. I say aim high. Think about it at multiple levels. So take a minute and do that. Think about, okay, what are my policy, program, initiative, whatever it is. And again, whether it's an internal, like maybe you have a change management initiative within your agency. Okay, how does this help the people in my agency achieve something? Just giving you food for thought that this can apply in all kinds of contexts. And you want to think about aspirations that your stakeholders share. There can be very particular ones with particular people, but notice when you aim high, you can often find goals and aspirations people share. For example, our anti-poverty narrative, where people served by the programs are aspiring for a job and a nice home, that sort of thing. So did our audience. Think about that. I'm going to try to actually answer a question. What are some best practices or examples for employing staff personal stories that connect with the mission to resonate with the public? I love that question because I really do encourage you to do that. If you're not, is to put your people in the picture. The Partnership for Public Service has great research and resources about how to talk and communicate about federal government and people who work in government, because putting a face on federal government is key. There are a number of ways, best practices and examples, but which again, to really dig into it, we'll have to do another workshop on how to create compelling content. And we could really dig into what that looks like in a federal context. But for here, I'd say frame it first. That's the biggest thing here. What are the big ideas you want people to think about the people in your agency and make sure your stories reflect those ideas? Let's keep moving to problems. Now, this can be a sticky wicket because a lot of you deal with very complex problems. And the science I want to share is one of the more important pieces of information we share with policy experts, scientists, and so forth, to explain the need to keep things simple. It's called fluency theory. Studies demonstrate an inverse relationship between semantic, visual, and conceptual complexity and the perceived credibility of the information conveyed. Or people are more likely to understand information they easily understand. And you probably saw what I did there. I threw a bunch of jargon at you, a bunch of words you might not be familiar with. If that happens in your agency, you know what your audience is feeling. And I'm sure a lot of you struggle with this. But what I did was translate it into a simple statement of the big idea. You need to keep things simple for people to trust what you're saying about your program, your policy, or your initiative. Complexity raises questions, suspicion. People think, okay, they're trying to pull the wool over my eyes, or what's it say in the fine print? Those are things people say in response to complexity that give you a hint about the importance of this. What this thing says, whoops, sorry, I'm pushing my clicker. Inverse relationship, meaning the more complicated, the less I trust it. Semantic is the words you use. Visual is visual complexity. Are the slides you're showing them simple and easy, or are they really confusing? Literally the same concept applies to visual as well as verbal communication. Conceptual complexity is the ideas. Are you throwing too many ideas at them at once? So, and too much information. At Hattaway, we use TMI as shorthand. That's too many ideas, that's too much information. So we need to compress the complexity. That's what this narrative framework helps you do. Here's another tool for that, metaphors. I'm going to bang through this real quick and send these slides to you. But the use of metaphor is a really powerful tool for storytelling because metaphors make it easy to understand things. They help people process complex ideas and information by relating them to concepts that are already familiar with them and that might be common in their culture. So here's the line from that anti-poverty narrative. A lot of kids don't get an equal start in life. That's literally a metaphor. It's pretty subtle, but that's a metaphor of a starting line, getting a start in life. You could even say starting line. When you speak to a metaphor, people understand that. And people, in this case, inherently understood, oh yeah, kids don't all start out in the same place in life. A starting line, like for a race, is an example of what's called a surface metaphor. Sayings used in everyday speech that help people connect new ideas and information to things they already know. And those are culturally dependent. So to understand a starting line, I have to be in a culture where starting lines are a common thing. So some metaphors are dependent like that. So you need to think about, is the metaphor I'm using relatable to my audience? But there are also what's called deep metaphors. People of all backgrounds use a handful of what are called physical metaphors to understand the world. This is based on research in 30 countries for communications and storytelling. I'm going to show you what these metaphors are. Balance, connection, container, control, journey, resource, transformation. I'm going to bang through some examples. They're kind of easy to understand once you look at them. Balance is a state of physical, psychological, or social equilibrium. Things are in balance. Things are working well, right? Balance is a metaphor for things working well, for things being fair, for things being healthy. Here's an example of message that we created for a foundation who was concerned that our social environment is out of balance. And all these problems in society are an example of society being out of balance. So their ideas for society were to bring things into balance. Connection, yearning to relate to others, feel a sense of belonging. We talked about that in Maslow. Here's an example from a company we work with that works with communities in South America to create products that are sold in North America. And it says what they do is bring together people from different worlds who believe in development. This is in the Amazon rainforest region, who believe in development without destruction. So they're creating community businesses in the Andes and Amazon and connecting them to markets across the globe. This is very simple but powerful ways to talk about, this is talking about an international supply chain, right? A very complex topic. And in the presentations that they do, they go into the complexities. This frames it first. Containers keep things down and keep things in and out. They can symbolize inclusion or exclusion. We've seen this in our work when talking about communities as containers. This is from a public health campaign that was communicating, if you live in this zip code, your life expectancy is lower than if you live in that zip code. I just use that as an example of people can feel within a community. And in fact, the narrative about living in a low-income community, a lot of people see success as getting out of the community. They're in or they're out. That's, again, this is metaphorically how the brain is working. What we wanted here was not encourage people to move out, but to improve health in every community. Control, mastery over matters or issues that affect us. This is one from a campaign we did on birth control, encouraging young women to use birth control. As you can see, the whole communication is about the idea of having control over my life, which was an aspiration. It was focused at young women, predominantly low-income women, who didn't feel a lot of control in their life, and this is one way they could have more control. Journey, a sense of moving forward. It can be a physical journey, which is the physical sort of experience, obviously, of going places, but also social or psychological journey. This is an example of using that in a communication where we did work for Stanford University on the student journey throughout life, and where they start thinking about college and what they want to study. So this is based on tons of research, but again, told as a story of a journey. And your programs might take people on a journey from, poverty to self-sufficiency or something. Resources, capacities, or abilities to achieve an outcome. That's back to the idea of tools. Remember that word, our programs are tools. They are resources that you can use to achieve an outcome. Finally, transformation, changing from one state to another. A lot of your work might speak to this. Back to that story of transformation in 2 sentences. So these are examples of metaphors you can use. I'm going to give you a minute to think about problems addressed in your work. Try to step back in the big picture and like, are we making connections? Are we transforming? Think like that. And just jot some ideas down, like, okay, what's a big idea that we could use to frame what we're doing? Several folks had put in questions about different storytelling frameworks, the ABT approach, the CCAR pattern. I love my federal government friends, got all the acronyms. Yes, there's a number of really great frameworks. What I'm recommending is this narrative framework kind of is very relevant across it is relevant no matter what you're doing. And it can kind of be used with those. I would recommend you look at this one because it's based in the brain science about story, and then pull in other elements from other frameworks that you find useful. I'm going to keep going, and then we'll get back to other questions. Because we'll go through our last section, which is the problem or solution piece. Now the simple lesson here is to connect that problem you just came up with an idea about how to frame it in a simple but powerful way. So connect it directly to a solution that intuitively flows from it, meaning you get it right away. That's what we're after. I didn't say it's this science before, but I think it's important. When we talk about fluency theory and making it easier to understand so people can trust what you're saying, I mean, they instantly understand it. They understand it intuitively. That means that our intuitions are our snap judgments, our gut responses, right? When we first, see or hear something. And we want to work with that. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to begin to understand it. So like literally right away. So to do that in this framework, you want to state a specific solution that ties intuitively to your problem. Like, oh, I get the connection. Like one of the examples we just showed, the communities in the Amazon aren't connected to markets in North America. We're connected to them by building supply chains, blah, blah, blah. See how simple that frame is? That really just helps your people go into the weeds with you when you start it that way. But for maximum motivation, we want to show how your programs and policies and initiatives help the individuals, but also help society at large. So here's that anti-poverty narrative, the net ladders of opportunity work. A lot of kids don't get an equal start in life because their families struggle just to make ends meet. Government should offer struggling families proven tools to help them become more financially secure and save to send their kids to college, et cetera. I'm basically just showing the problem, don't get an equal start in life, but what is the cause of the problem? What's underneath that? Their families don't make enough money. I mean, this is very simple stuff. And sometimes you think your programs and policies are much more complicated than that. But getting down to the human element of it and explaining it in a way that anybody can understand is a very powerful thing to do when you're trying to get bigger audiences, more people to understand and support it. So very simple connection of problem to solution. And let's cause of the problem and solution that addresses the cause of the problem. And then benefits of solution. This is one of the messages we tested. Middle-class Americans are the engine of our economy. To get the economy moving again, it makes sense for government to offer tools that help people enter the middle class and achieve financial security. So a couple things there. What we've done is we tested this. This was 74% of the public said, yes, that's a good reason for the government to have anti-poverty programs. One reason is because they're seeing benefits to themselves, right? Oh yeah, I want the economy to be moving, right? This was during the Obama administration coming out of the Great Recession. So the economy, and of course, inflation is on people's minds now. Yeah, helping more people work gets the economy going. That's good for all of us, right? That's the idea here. We haven't lost the folks who are served by the programs. They are entering the middle class. That's their aspiration. They want to achieve financial security. So we're combining both the benefit to the individuals and the benefits to the country, to the community, to all of us. So think about that. What's the solution to your problem? Hopefully you've got some metaphor ideas that are kind of have straightforward answers, solutions to frame, and think about, okay, how does it benefit the people who are directly served by it? And how does it help others? Take some notes there. That's sort of toward the end of my fast talking consultant routine where I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. Okay, a couple great, and thanks for the folks at Partnership who are showing me questions and highlighting them for me. There's quite a few, so thanks for the help here. Many times we're caught having to be reactive, right? Which I'm sure is the case. If you're working communications, public affairs, much of your day is just dealing with the incoming. Any tips for using these concepts and framing responses when there is no time for developing a full narrative? Absolutely. And it's use that framework, right? So remember, we started by a framework, people go problem solutions with some big ideas, right? My answer is you do want that as a touchstone to go back to. Now that might be one framework with the big ideas and messages about, a key program. We've helped agencies develop brand, what we've used the word from the marketing world of brand, meaning what's the message about our agency? Who are we? What do we do? How do we solve people's problems, et cetera? That becomes sort of your touchstone that you want to go to every time. Now, I know that can be hard. It depends on are you getting, tough questions about some program that didn't work or something like that? But even there, so there's an example. I'm getting tough questions about a program that doesn't seem to be working. Start with, here's the purpose of the program, here's the problems it's meant to solve, right? You frame it in that way that makes people value the program, and then get your factual responses from your experts, like, here's what we're understanding about this problem, right? So getting prepared and getting your framework is going to help it's going to help you react in a more strategic way every day, all the time. Another one here. How do you reconcile storytelling with the push to keep content brief and keyword rich? Yes, that's a communicator creating probably for social media. You saw how short this example was of David, the guy who slept on the doorstep. Now he runs the building. That's how. Stories can be long form, and in a storytelling workshop, we can go through short form and longer form. You want to be able to do both. I'm hoping that example helps. When you've got this framework and you know a few keywords, that you can bring those words into every story you tell. That's the whole idea of having a framework. Every story reflects those ideas, whether it's 2 sentences or 2 pages. And I do want to address that, actually. Sometimes long form story is important for government. One of the great examples I show of effective storytelling in government was about from the highway safety world. And it was about the dangers of distracted driving, and specifically the idea of divided attention. Policymakers passing laws that you can talk on your cell phone as long as your hands are on the wheel. The report was about the science of talking on your cell phone actually divides your attention, and you cannot, by definition, pay 100% to your driving if you're listening and talking on the phone. And that very in-depth, awesome report started with a story of a young woman driving a van in the middle of the day to go to volunteer at her church, and was talking on the phone, and because of divided attention, didn't see 3 cars go by her, and she ran a red light and struck a car, killed a child, and went to jail. Now, I sent that story to my kids, and they swore they would never talk on the phone while driving again. That came from a federal report. So I'm going to encourage you to think about the next communication that comes along. How do I start with the story? Because, and that was another question I got. How do I explain and use the power of stories when we're supposed to be using data and statistics? My advice to you every time is to start with a story, right? Because that, as we've explained to some extent here, primes the mind. It gets the brain ready to understand the facts, to care about the facts, right? People need to know and care in order to do something. That's a good example of our no feel do sort of shorthand, which you can use no matter what the communication. Okay, I've got this report. The policy folks want me to, make it famous. What do we need people to know, feel, and do as a result of this, of my communication, right? You can use that know, feel, do every day, all the time, to make sure every communication is strategic. So that was lots of answers to one question, but I thought it was a good question. Hope those answers are helpful. Let me look back at our content, see if we're getting through everything. Good one. Be strategic with statistics. I'm going to finish on this. I know you use a lot of numbers. Too many numbers are mind-numbing, is my little play on words. Select a few that open people's eyes in a meaningful way. Be strategic. There's lots of facts about anti-poverty programs. We picked one that showed 9 out of 10 people receive government benefits work or they can't work due to age or disability. That's a fact. And it opened people's eyes. In our research, we found people said, wow, I didn't know that. And it supported the narrative. Oh, the people who get help actually have jobs. That was an example of using statistics strategically along with stories to build support. Because surprise opens eyes. When you surprise people with a statistic that is meaningful, that's going to focus their attention on what you need them to focus on. So for further information, you can always email us at Hattaway if there's something you'd like to discuss. info@hattaway.com is the easy way to do that. We also have a blog and a podcast if you like to wonk out on communication science. It's called Achieve Great Things. We have articles on our website when the podcast is on iTunes. I do want to plug Stanford Social Innovation Review because they've got great writing about all kinds of strategies for achieving the kind of outcomes that you're often trying to achieve in government. Plus, they've got my article on aspirational communication. With that, I will turn it back to Jordan. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all your questions, but hopefully the resources will be helpful, and feel free to reach out if I can help you with them.
Doug, thank you so much. This has been a fabulous presentation and a fascinating conversation around how to approach effective storytelling and effective communication. So thank you for the time. And thanks to you all for the incredible questions that you submitted. And again, I'll echo Doug's apologies that we weren't able to get to all of them, but we will be following up, as Doug said, via email with some additional resources and some select slides from the presentation, just to help fill out your experience here, and a couple of questions in terms of a survey for us to know what you thought of today's event. So with that, we thank you all so much for joining us and wish you all a great day.
Thanks, everybody.